The British monarchy isn't very British. Queen Elizabeth has been on the throne for almost 70 years, and as head of state she symbolises Britishness. But all the monarchs going back for almost 1,000 years have hardly been British at all. In 1066, Duke William of Normandy brought over a force of about 7,000 men and landed them at Pevensey on the south coast of England. William and his army defeated the Saxon King Harold and his army at the Battle of Hastings. That's a fact that everyone in Britain knows. William was then crowned at Westminster Abbey and became King William I of England. Or was he? He wasn't a William, a Billy, or Bill, or even a Willie. The name William didn't exist in France in 1066. His actual name was Guillaume de Normandie. He was born in France in about 1027 and spent most of his life in France. Duke William and all of his men spoke the Norman French dialect of French. The Normans were Vikings who had been settled in France since 911 and embraced French culture, including the language. He was also known as Guillaume le Bâtard, which is translated as William the Bastard, which must have been really difficult when he was at school. His father was the Duke of Normandy and was called Robert the Magnificent, which is a much better name. His mother was Airlever, who was the daughter of Fulbert of Falaise, who may have been a tanner or he may have been an embalmer. After the conquest, the Normans became the new ruling class in England and Norman French became the language of the elite. In 1066, England probably had a population of about 2 million people, and there were less than 10,000 Normans who also had estates in Normandy. For the next 350 years or so, the ruling class of England spoke French, and the mass of the population spoke English. The nobles spoke the Norman French dialect, which has some Norse-influenced words and pronunciations. For example, a headland on the coast in proper French is Cap. In Norman French, it is Nez. In Norse, it is Ness, like in Skegness. In proper French, a cat is chat. In Norman French, the word for cat is cat. The Norman kings and their successors, the Plantagenets, were all French-speaking and were called Guillaume, Henri, Etienne, Richard, Edouard and Jean, rather than William, Henry, Stephen, Richard, Edward and John. The wives and mothers of these kings were mostly foreign and French-speaking as well, so they would have been brought up with two French-speaking parents. They wouldn't get the opportunity to learn English when they were children. For example, Henry II was the son of the Count of Anjou in France, and his mother Matilda was the Conqueror's granddaughter. He married Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was the richest and most powerful woman in France, and was formerly married to the King of France. So you can't get much more French than that. Henry IV, also known as Henry Bolingbroke, was probably the first king to be brought up speaking English. Henry was not brought up as a royal prince learning French in the royal court. He was actually the Duke of Lancaster until he overthrew King Richard II by force. Henry was born, like me, in the great county of Lincolnshire, where generally we don't speak French. In fact, we barely speak English. For example, if I was to greet you with, "Now then, mate, how's your tatties?" it would be translated into English as, "Good day, sir, how are your potatoes?" or in French as,
"Bonjour, monsieur, comment vont vos pommes de terre?"
In 1485, the English throne was seized by Henry Tudor, who was born in Wales to a Welsh family whose grandfather was Owain ap Meredydd ap Tudor. I got my Welsh mate Alan to teach me to say that. Henry made great play of his Welsh ancestry and was known to his mates as Harry Tudor. He used the Welsh dragon of Cadwallader on his coat of arms. When Henry Tudor became King Henry VII, he had the good sense to build a palace at Richmond, which is just down the road from where I live in Twickenham, and is where his granddaughter Queen Elizabeth died in 1603. Elizabeth was famously the Virgin Queen, so she had no children and was succeeded by James VI, a king of Scotland who was the great-grandson of Henry VII, the Welsh king. So once again we had a foreign ruler with a broad Scottish accent who was both the King of England and the King of Scotland. Scotland was an independent country with its own parliament, army and legal system. Have you ever noticed that houses built in the early 17th century during the rule of King James are described as Jacobean architecture and not Jamesian architecture? It's because James is an anglicised version of the biblical name Jacob. The original Hebrew name was Yaakov or Jacob, which is translated into Latin as Jacquemus. In the late 14th century, John Wycliffe made the first Bible translations from Latin into Middle English and translated Jacquemus into James. In all future English translations of the Bible, the name stuck, especially after 1611 when King James I sponsored the translation, then called the Authorised Version of the Bible. The Spanish version of the name is Iago, and Sant Iago in Spain is dedicated to St. James. The Scottish Stewart Dynasty ruled all of the British Isles until 1714. Like the rest of the monarchs before them, the Stuarts married foreign queens to maintain alliances. This was much healthier than the European Habsburgs, who all married close relatives and became seriously inbred. Charles II of Spain was so inbred he had a deformed jaw and was infertile. His inability to produce an heir led to the War of Spanish Succession in 1701. Our own Charles II was also known as the Merry Monarch because he excelled at enjoying himself. He married a Portuguese princess called Catherine of Braganza but had no legitimate children. However, he had at least 12 illegitimate offspring. All of his children got very grand titles. He may have been a serial adulterer, but at least he did look after his kids. His male children were all called Fitzroy or Fitzcharles, which comes from the French fils, for son of, so son of the king and son of Charles. King James II succeeded his brother Charles, but he was a Catholic ruling over a largely Anglican Protestant country. James was so unpopular with the political class that they invited in James's Anglican daughter Mary and her Dutch husband Willem Hendrik, Prince van Oranje, to be joint monarchs. He was better known in England as William, Prince of Orange. Willem landed in Torquay with 40,000 troops, and James, along with his Stuart claim to the throne, was pushed out. So now we had a Dutch king. Of course, there never was a King Willem of England. He became King William III. So up to this point then, we've had 2 King Guillaumes and 1 King Willem. William and Mary were succeeded by the last Stuart monarch, Queen Anne, who was Mary's sister. She had 17 pregnancies, but none of the children survived. After she died in 1709, Parliament wanted a Protestant monarch to succeed her. But because most of the royal family had married foreign Catholics, they had to look a very long way down the list of potential new kings before they got to the Protestant Georg Ludwig, Duke of Brunswick-Lüneburg. He was as German as currywurst and sauerkraut, but he wasn't a Catholic. Also, he could hardly speak English, which was great, because he didn't interfere with Parliament. Unlike most of Europe, we had a strong and well-established democracy rather than an autocratic king, and Parliament would rather the monarch kept out of politics. So Duke Georg became King George I. He was followed by 3 more Georges who all married German or Scandinavian wives who were highborn and Protestant. The Georges were succeeded by William IV in 1830. This William was the first one to be actually baptised William, almost 800 years after the Norman conquest. Like Charles II, he had many illegitimate children, 5 sons and 5 daughters, with his mistress Mrs. Jordan. They were all named Fitzclarence because before he was king, William was the Duke of Clarence. Because William had no legitimate children, he was succeeded by his niece Victoria in 1838. Victoria married her German first cousin Albert and preferred speaking German to speaking English. Victoria's great-grandson, George VI, was the first British king to marry a British woman, a Scot called Elizabeth Bowes-Lyons, in 1923. He was born on the 12th of November 1895, on Prince Albert's birthday, and Victoria asked if he could be named after Albert in his memory. His family name was Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which was the same as that of Prince Albert. The name was changed to Windsor in the First World War due to anti-German feeling. The British Isles has always been a diverse place, and for many centuries we have had foreign-born monarchs who didn't even speak English. But rather than weaken the monarchy, it was strengthened by its diversity. But they are all absorbed into our melting pot culture and became as English as chicken tikka masala and lager. Thanks for watching my little film.